This is Talking Drupal, a bi-weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. We record this live on Wednesday afternoons on a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 125, Friday, August 5th, 2016. Analytics.
Good afternoon.
Howdy.
Good afternoon.
TGIF.
Yes, we're recording actually on a Friday, not a Wednesday.
Man, I glazed right over the intro. Did you say Wednesday?
I did. Well, I just kept that in there because that's what we always do. But thanks, guys, for accommodating me this week.
Oh, anytime.
I had a few days off in Maine.
Oh, that's right.
Semi-off. And, John, your recommendations of places to visit was pretty good. Yummy's.
Yeah.
It was quite a store.
Yeah, right.
A store floor to ceiling with any candy you could ever think of from your childhood and everything. It was pretty amazing.
Oh, yeah. They sell by the pound, I imagine.
They actually, what's interesting is they package everything there. Like, they must buy this stuff wholesale from somewhere, and then they repackage it with their brand of Yummies. So it'd be like, think of a candy from a kid, like maybe hot tamales or something.
Okay.
It would be in a Yummies package, but it'd be, labeled as hot tamales.
Interesting.
Literally anything you could think of. Some of them are still in their original packages. Those must be from vendors who are still making them, like Charleston Chew. I remember that candy as a kid, and they had it there. I mean, we were naming things on the way to the store to try to see if we could find them. Everything was there.
I used to freeze Charleston Chews and then break them into little pieces.
Exactly.
So.
Well, and joining us, how about some intros, huh? So I'm Stephen Cross, and joining me as usual is John Picozzi from Oomph.
Good afternoon, Internet friends.
So the one thing you didn't warn me about, John, at Ogunquit, Maine, is traffic. I mean,
yeah, this time of year down Route 1 there, it can get to be a little bit of a bear. You tend to enjoy a lot of scenery as you're going down scenic Route 1 through Ogunquit and Wells and Perkins Cove and whatnot.
Yeah, it's the first time I've visited that area, so it was a nice time.
Yeah, it's great up there.
And also joining us, we have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Development.
Good afternoon. Make me miss Maine. Haven't been to, I usually go every year or two to go whitewater rafting. It's been a few years, so I'll have to make my way up there. Jordan's never been to Maine either, so it'll be a good chance to visit.
So before we get too far down our topic today, Nick, is that in fact Legos over your shoulder there, that building? And if so, what is it a replica of?
Yes, it is. It's actually it's the latest modular, so one of the styles of Lego or modular buildings, and the one on the left is called a brick bank. So it's like a Lego bank that has a laundromat in it, which has like a secret back door to the bank vault. It's kind of funny. And the one next to it is the Lego Palace Cinema, which is a movie theater.
Huh. That's really interesting.
And if you had made it to the housewarming party,
yeah,
you would see the rest of the collection. Maybe someday I'll give a tour. But
I was waiting for housewarming party number 2.
I think after we finish the kitchen, we'll have. Actually, we did have 2. We had one for mostly Spanish speakers and one for mostly English speakers.
Oh
so
man, I missed the Spanish-speaking housewarming party.
It was a blast. Both
I
were.
would have been a hit there. Like all of 4 words in Spanish.
Would have been fun. It's about what I know. Actually, I speak a little bit more than that, but not enough to hold a conversation with native speakers.
Okay, let's move on to our topic. An introduction to it anyway. So today we're going to talk about analytics, and not just your basic analytics of Google Analytics, but other things that you can do in Drupal to get information back. Some custom coding you can do, some modules you can use, and basically to learn more about your website. But before we do that, I almost forgot that we have tips. So let's go through our tips of the week. John, D8 meta tags.
Yeah, so we ran into this issue. We are using, we're building a site in D8, and we're using the Share This social sharing module. And we're actually running into an issue where the Share This email button, when you click it, it opens an iframe. And typically that iframe has buttons in it that display a couple of different email platforms that you can select to share something via email. Well, the issue that we're having is when you pop that up, it actually doesn't display correctly at all, like completely looks broken. And we did some tracking back through code and found that it's actually because the meta tag module is affecting the meta description of the meta tag in that iframe, which is kind of weird. And changing the code so it breaks that basically breaks that iframe. So this is an in progress tip. We're going to reach out to the maintainer of the meta tags module, and once we have all of the information, and see where we should kind of file this ticket and how we should go about patching it. But if you're banging your head against the wall because you're using Share This and it's not working appropriately, and you're using meta tags, this could be the reason.
Interesting. It's funny how a lot of our tips come from the issues that we're dealing with that week, right?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, and this is like an issue that, honestly, we looked at everything from like the theme layer to like, okay, is it just poorly written JavaScript, from Share This to like all of these other things. Finally going through and disabling every module before we were like, oh, we disabled meta tags, and all of a sudden this thing works again. That's
right.
weird. And the reason it's my tip is to basically save everybody that hassle.
It's those type of issues where you start randomly disabling modules that it lets you know that you're going to have a good week.
All right. Nick, your tip.
So my tip is another Git-related tip. I've been really doing a lot of work with Git recently, so a lot of my most recent tips have been around that. But my tip here is how many times have you started a new project, then did Git status, realize that you had tons of stuff to add, Git add, commit it, and then look at it and realize, oh, I just added stage file proxy or some other subdirectory that you usually don't want to put up. Or like your IDE file. So in my case, I would occasionally start a new project, and then the IDE I use has a .idea folder, and the amount of times I would add that, or my Sash cache files, for example. You can create a global git ignore file. So you just go into your home directory and you put a .git ignore file in there, and you can add anything that you normally have. So in my git ignore file, I've got things like my IDEs. I got like thumbnail directories, Sash cache files. Any of the files that a project will typically have, but you never want to add to a project. Then there's a quick flag that you just run. It's something like git config global -- exclude core.excludes file, and then you just point to the git ignore you just created. So it's really, you just want to Google global git ignore file, and you can find that configuration flag. But it's just a quick way to have a single place, and you can any Git repository that you have in your system will now follow that git ignore. Now you still have to. One caveat is when you're working with other developers, if, you have to make sure that they'll also have something similar, or they may open up and then end up adding the IDE files or something. But I've got like node modules, npm debug log, coder, simple HTML, like a bunch of just modules that you never want in your production server added there.
Great tip. I used it yesterday for the first time myself. So my tip is, I call it time tracking, but I'm trying to solve a problem of where did my day go? Does everyone have that problem? Like it's
Sometimes.
6 o'clock and you're looking at yourself and you're wondering what happened and all the things you wanted to get done. And so most of us who bill time are putting time in to some sort of system for time tracking. I'm actually doing something a little bit more than that, and I can show you here. This is what I keep next to me all day long for those on the video. Something that looks horrible like that, but it's basically a notepad that I put in all the stuff that I'm doing, even outside of business stuff. So anytime that I'm spending, I just get into a habit of putting writing a title of what I'm doing, and then how much time I spend on it. So I can figure out where my day goes, not just from the billable work that I'm doing, but the non-billable work and the personal stuff, and trying to get a grasp on understanding how sometimes I'm not as billable as I should be, and other times, where these things are going. So,
how long have you been doing that for?
I've been doing this for probably 6 months, 7 months.
And have you gathered any analytics out of it yet?
You know what it's helped me do? It's helped me be conscious of getting lost on something and getting distracted by things. So I don't necessarily have analytics, but I am much better at managing my time now, and I think it's a result of doing this process. So if you're wondering where your day goes, you can figure it out by writing it down. Boy, it's such a stupid tip, right?
Next week on Talking Drupal, we'll be discussing time tracking.
Yeah, I mean, time tracking in general is a great topic, and we're going to add it to our list on, what do you do, how do you do it, and for people who, do billable work, sometimes you're entering time into 2 or 3 different places sometimes.
So
that becomes a task by itself.
Funny story on that. I'm religious for every day, tracking my time at the end of the day. And a couple of weeks ago, I just had 3 really busy days, and I just, for whatever reason, didn't get to time tracking. And I sat down on Thursday and was like, oh crap, I got to put time in for Monday through Thursday. And oh man, I was clawing my eyes out and pulling my hair and every other like really bad analogy I could make, trying to figure out what I did that week, and it was just awful. It was so awful.
You know that you worked a ridiculous amount of time because you're tired from it, but you cannot pinpoint exactly where it went.
Yeah.
I mean, I struggled definitely, even with this system that I have now that seems to be working pretty good. I'll still have days that I'll look and go into my time and I'll see the previous day that I only did it for 2 tasks in the morning and then missed the rest of the day. You know, because you get distracted into something and it's so easy.
I might have to try that. Because I'm really good at tracking client work when I'm doing billable. We can talk more about this next, when we talk about it during the show. But I have a program that I think most of us on this call use that helps me track that. And then I've actually gotten generally good at tracking flat rate work, just so I can see how much time I'm working on projects. But if it's just like business direct or like personal or something, I have it can get away from you. You take a break for lunch and you realize it's been 45 minutes or an hour and 10 minutes or something, and you can get back to work.
So writing things down, I guess, is my tip. Let's move on to our topic for today. Broad title, analytics. But we're kind of talking about some real specific things here, actually, on ways to use analytics and how you can actually do it in Drupal. What kinds of things do you guys think of when you when we talk about analytics? What does that mean to you guys in terms of implementation or what you use them for?
Well, I mean, the first thing that jumps to mind, I think, for everybody, both on the business side and development side, is Google Analytics. I mean, you hear analytics, and that's what people think. Like, who's visiting the site? How long are they visiting the site for? What pages are they going to? So we'll certainly be talking somewhat about that, but I think there's a whole nother side that Drupal is fairly good at handling that I think we're going to talk about today as well. And I think one of those is gathering the information you need to start to personalize the website for particular users. And then the other side of it is just generalized analytics for performance reasons. Even if it's not website related, it could just be, server related. It's just analytics as a broad term is gathering data and then so that you can analyze it.
I'm going to go down a rat hole right now. Is whole nother grammatically a thing you can say? You said it twice just then. Whole nother. Just curious. You said it's a whole nother.
A whole another.
A whole nother. I mean, that's a common phrase. A whole nother. Is that an actual? Is that grammatically correct? Whole nother.
If only there were some sort of internet searching device we could use.
I'm looking at it right now.
I never thought of it that way. It's a common phrase formed by splitting the adjective another. Makes no sense from a logical or grammatical standpoint, but is often used in formula to create a colloquial tone. So technically incorrect, which is the best kind of incorrect. Oh wait, yeah, I guess technically that's not good grammar.
But I don't know what you would say instead.
It's a whole different category.
Yes. Yeah. Right. All right. Sorry to derail us there for a moment. I was just curious. It stuck out when you said it twice.
Not a problem.
Send comments to talkingdrupal@gmail.com.
Exactly. So
definition of analytics.
Yeah, I get so distracted by your whole nother. John, what kind of things come to your mind when you start thinking about analytics? And how early do you think about analytics when you're looking at a project?
Oh man, those are tough questions. So the first one's pretty easy. I always think of Google Analytics. More recently, I've started to think about Google Tag Manager, and we can talk about that and what the differences are there and why you'd use one over the other. But ultimately, yes, I'm thinking about Google Analytics and when do I start thinking about them? Honestly, that is like one of the last things I think about on a project. My usual workflow is to build out the site and then when the day the site launches, go on and add the Google Analytics tracking code and set up XML sitemap module and that sort of thing. So I'm doing that SEO stuff the day the site launches to try to keep the data that's gathered as clean as possible. But I know that depending on what kind of site you're building and if you need that analytical data for displaying content, you may actually start to think about that kind of earlier on. I am actually working on a site right now where we're tracking the amount of views that are happening on content, and based on that amount of views, we're actually displaying popular trending content on the homepage. So with that said, we're actually not using Google Analytics for that. We're using Drupal's default statistics module to keep track of those statistics and to curate that data. So it's something that could be thought about early on if the project needs it, but ultimately I'm doing that thinking towards the end of the project.
I think a real good step during the discovery process for a project is to always ask, what kind of information do you need to know from your website to help you make good business decisions? And that we're talking about analytics and statistics, but a real sort of broad question like that opens up a great conversation with the customer about the kinds of things that they could use from the website and really could change some of the information architecture of the site. If those questions are posed early, it could really change the way you do some things, and it actually could also bring into the project some functionality that was never thought of.
And I think that's really
early on.
really important that you look at the type of site that you're building and you make those decisions early on, because you are right, they can affect your wireframes, your design, so on and so forth. And personalization or content that is based on analytical data may not be something that, it's not for every site. It's like not that every site needs to have that, but I think you definitely want to look at it early on and say, okay, well, is this an e-commerce site? Okay, does it need most popular product or most popular viewed product or something to that effect? Is this purely an informational site, and this data doesn't really need to apply here? So to your point, I think that thinking about it early on can have benefits depending on what type of site it is, but it may not be for every site.
And in that process, you at least will know when you start talking about it early on, will the out-of-the-box things available supply what's needed, or will there need to be some custom work done?
Right. So as I said, we're using statistics to keep track of page views. I don't know if the Google Analytics module has views integration with it, but I'm sure there may be some sort of add-on module you could use to get that integration.
To pull the data back in.
To pull the data back in, so that way you could say, oh, okay, based on Google Analytics calculation of page views, what's the most popular page? So I don't know if that actually exists, but that'd be pretty interesting to find out. But statistics does a pretty good job of it. Just takes kind of I would call it a dumb count of how many people have viewed that page, and you can actually set it to ignore admin views and stuff like that, so you're not unintentionally inflating the results. And then it has views integration, so you can actually view data based on how many views it got in a week, a day, a month, a year, that sort of thing. So it is very useful in that regard.
I think it also tracks views that come up through views as well. So if you have a view that contains the content and somebody sees it, because many times a lot of content on the site is never actually visited. It's just seen through a view or a block or something. I think statistics actually integrates with that decently.
So I think it's actually only if you're viewing the full node that it will do that.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, then.
So you either have to go to the node page or you have to view the full node. It won't do it if it just, like a title just appears in a view.
Okay. It's been a while since I've looked at that, but
Right.
Okay, it's good to know.
Which I think makes sense for, that sort of basic information.
I mean, it really does in what it's doing, because if you're seeing the title, you're not actually viewing the page. You're just viewing the title. I mean, there are listing pages all over the place on most sites. So, that might not work out the best way possible for you.
So, what are some of the things you guys have done that might fall outside of that basic statistics that you get from Google Analytics and from the statistics module? Is there anything that you guys have done that sort of stands out from that?
Yeah, I think there's 3 or 4 things that I've done. I can mention them quickly, and we can just dive into 1 or 2 of them. I think the first thing is analytics around a third-party service. So, for example, if you have Vimeo or YouTube, being able to see how many minutes were watched on the video, or how many times people started to play it. So you're getting analytics that are similar to Google Analytics. It's just coming from a different service. Another thing that's fairly common on my side is there's a module called Simple Ad, which allows your end user to essentially create an image ad. And Simple Ad has some rudimentary tracking. It will track, how many times something was viewed, as well as how many times it was clicked on, and it kind of sorts it based on month, week, year, etc., etc. So you can see, some information there. And I think what generally tends to be more interesting, solutions is um, when you're tracking actions on a website. So you'll create a custom entity, or you'll create a node or something to track it, and you track what a user is doing. So the amount of content that a user created, the amount of times they edited that content, the number of times they clicked on a specific link versus another link. So you're starting to do tracking of user action so that you can then make determination. It's kind of like, it's similar to A/B testing in that you can see what people are doing and pivot on that. But I think that type of analytics really needs to be inserted into the process.
So is there a different category there? So, typically when I think of analytics, I think of like the numbers of page views, the types of devices people were on, the locations they're coming in from. Do we get into like a little bit of a divide between, analytical data and personalization data? Somebody looked at this page and that page on the website, so let's show them these types of views, as opposed to just analytical data of like, hey, that person looked at these two pages, or those two pages. Is there a breakdown there?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's more granular. But I mean, ultimately, the reason why you're using like Google Analytics is to see the health of specific pages, to see how much traffic your site's getting, and you make decisions based on that. You make a decision, hey, this particular page is getting way more traffic than this other page, so maybe we need to reword that page or change the location or something. Like if people are getting confused on your site. The personalization is kind of just taking that down one level. Instead of globally on the website, you're focusing on the same information for a specific user.
What you're really doing there is you're capturing this data, and instead of using it to make business decisions, you're using it to make some software decisions, right? It's really what's happening. So based on what's happening on the website is acting on that data that you're tracking.
Yeah, I mean, it ends up being more of a content, content aggregation decision than a like business decision. Like, hey, we're going to put we're going to feature this page on the home page, or vice versa.
And I think where you start to get the divide, but they all still relate, is when you start using things like New Relic. So you use New Relic, you can get a lot of analytics and a lot of data on specific things in your website. So for example, you can say, this particular view is taking, 60% of the database cycles on our servers, but it's only getting 20% of the traffic. So you can then make business decisions on whether or not that view is useful, or you can optimize it. You can start making decisions. So I mean, I think all analytics fall in that category. You gather the data, you interpret that data, and then you make decisions on that data. The question is, and what we're talking about today is, what method you use to capture the data, what tools you use to interpret it, and then what kinds of decisions you're making based on those interpretations. But I think at its core, it's all pretty similar. I think the big difference is between, when you're tracking server level stuff with New Relic versus, user actions with like Google Analytics or Vimeo, or even just custom code.
Right. I have an example from the food truck site that I work on, foodtrucksin.com. We capture all of the searches. So if you're looking for a food truck in Providence, you type in Providence, Rhode Island, do a search, and it returns the food trucks and where they're serving. So we track all of the searches that come into the site. We do that for a bunch of reasons. We'll know what cities are the most popular people are searching for. There's business side of those analytics. You can imagine what they would be. The other side of it is also like a security thing that we do, is that the website gets hit constantly from people trying to pull the data, and bots that are competitors or people in the industry trying to grab our food trucks. We have a really great list of food trucks on the website, and they're trying to grab that data from us. So we'll see bots come in, do a search, and basically scrape the website. So I use that same analytics that we're capturing on who's searching. The search data, we're capturing the IP address, so I limit the number of searches people can do an hour, which has cut down the bots completely. Is if you're only allowed to do 15 searches in an hour, that the bot is not very helpful unless you're going to let it run for weeks and weeks and weeks.
So the security side of that's really interesting, but you said something earlier on that's interesting as well. You know, if you're tracking this, you know, the cities that those searches are taking place on, from a business standpoint, you could say, okay, you know, we perform really well in Providence, Rhode Island, and Boston, Massachusetts, and New York, New York, right? We're not performing so well in Los Angeles, California. And then you could make the decision to say, okay, well, we're going to do an ad campaign in LA to try to increase this number and boost our audience in these markets that we're underperforming in. So, I mean, with that example right there, you can see the benefit to having this data available to you, not only for the security purposes, but also for, again, going back to business decisions and how it affects other sections of the business, not only just your website.
I mean, and I mean, you can make all sorts of decisions on that, and what the particular decisions are really depends on your business model. Because I mean, you can also, you know, you can also do user-related things. So, you know, if somebody searches Los Angeles first and then usually searches, you know, a specific suburb of Los Angeles next, you can start providing suggestive searches or something. I mean, there's a lot. So not everything is just business side. You can also make logical or programmatic decisions based on that, and just suggest the next search. Like if somebody searches Boston and then they search Roxbury next, you could just say, hey, did you mean Roxbury? Did you mean, you know, South End or something?
Yeah. The interesting thing about this is that, like, all the things that you guys have just mentioned are great ways to use the analytics. The key, and we're not using it all in that way all the time. The key for us is to get it captured. So, you know, I have almost 3 years or 2.5 years of searches tracked for people looking for food trucks, and at some point that data will be immensely valuable, or it probably is already, and in ways that I haven't even thought of yet. Which brings me to a point of when you're catching analytics, certainly down to the level that I'm doing it on this site, is, you know, what is the best way to implement that, and what is the hit that you take for doing something like I'm doing, which is basically every single search on the site, which is thousands a day, gets stored in detail. It's something to consider when you're starting to do some custom coding, or even when you turn on the statistics module, is that you're adding some pretty big overhead to your website. A lot of your, in terms of updating the database, anytime someone does something, especially if it's a read-only website mostly and it's not transactions, you're adding a lot of database hits.
Yeah. So
analytics.
So I mean, I think there's kind of four, when we look at this, and feel free to chime in if I'm missing one, but when you're looking at the performance implications of gathering statistics, and they could be really large sometimes, I think there's kind of 4 different categories that you have to worry about. So the first is the most common, which is like Google Analytics. Where Google Analytics typically isn't a very, it's not a big performance hit, because it's just JavaScript. It goes at the bottom of the document, and if your site is having some trouble or there's a lot of traffic, then the JavaScript just doesn't load. So it's not going to be a major performance hit. You just might not get the most accurate results out of it.
That's not technically a performance hit on your server either. It's a performance hit for the end user.
Client. It's a client.
Exactly. Yep. The second one is third-party analytics. So you're using something like Vimeo or YouTube, where they're tracking how much of a video is getting displayed, and it's not necessarily JavaScript, but it's a similar thing where your system's not actually tracking that information. Their system is, so it really depends on, you know, it really depends on how their system can handle it. The third one is if you're taking the information and posting it to your database, that's probably the biggest hit that you'll get, where each time something happens, you're making a database transaction or you're making a database call, you're creating a new entity, creating a new node, even sometimes creating a log entry in a file. Although that's generally a lot more performant, you can still run into trouble if you don't handle those properly. But your website is performing something each time that action happens. So if that action happens enough, you're going to need to mitigate that. And that's typically where people get into trouble when they're gathering analytics. The fourth one is kind of a hybrid of each of these, and that is if you're using a service to track that information, like Loggly. Loggly is a website that you can use to track any kind of data that you want as far as logs, and I think they charge you based on the number of errors per, or the number of logs that you send, and the number of different ways you categorize that. But your website is doing something, but you're pushing it somewhere else. So it's kind of midway between where you're not handling the load of the write, but you're handling the load of actually sending that information. But it can be a good happy medium if you need more customized information, but you don't want to handle it.
Ultimately, it's funny. We're going to use the term business decision quite a bit in this podcast, I think. But ultimately, it comes down to what's going to be the best for the business, and the business decision to say, okay, this search is going to get logged in the database, and that's going to be a little bit of a performance hit because we have to write to the database and so on and so forth. But that analytical data is valuable to us for security, for figuring out what markets we need to be more aggressive in marketing, for things we haven't even thought of yet. So, I think if you can justify the performance implications, they're well worth it. The other thing you could do too is you could build out some of the infrastructures that we built out. Actually, have a central logging appliance that's basically just a server that handles the logging. So you're looking at more like something that Nick just said, where you're logging it, but there's a server that's dedicated to logging that it has resources that it's using for that logging. So you're basically just interacting with that server, which is it's going to be a little bit less of a performance impact for your website. But that's kind of a really heavy-handed approach if it's just some real simple logging that your web server should be able to handle.
In terms of the load on your site, there's two ways to approach. Let's say you're writing custom code, like I did in my example. There's two ways to approach this. One is do you manage it through a content type for your logging? And the reason you would do that is if you wanted to be able to create views or use the other Drupal-y things that you could use if you create through a content type, which carries quite a bit of overhead with it. The other way to do it is to just create a SQL table in the database and insert the rows that way, which are incredibly faster than managing content types. And it kind of depends which one you would choose based on the stuff you need to get at the end of that process.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to how, as you said, how it's going to be used. Is a user that's not going to know how to write a MySQL query going to need to access those logs and manipulate them in some way to filter them down to a certain subset? Are you going to be able? Are you going to write queries for those users to use? So I think it definitely comes down to the use case.
We should be clear that you can connect views to custom tables.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the question is how much time do you want to invest on the display as well as the import. You can use the entity metadata wrapper function to generate. If it's in a node, it's much easier. So you can connect it to views anyway. It's just a much lower barrier to entry. But the big con is that it's a huge performance hit. It's much slower generating a node for each action, or even incrementing values on a node, than it is to just have a table.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about, John, you mentioned earlier in the show here about Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so full disclosure, I am no Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager Pro, but I am smart enough to tell you what the differences are between the two and how you might choose one over the other. We'll assume that everybody knows what Google Analytics is and how you implement Google Analytics, right? You put JavaScript on your site, and then a user goes to a page, that JavaScript fires and registers that user in Google Analytics, right? And then based on that registration, all analytical data, person's device, person's browser, person's location, and so on and so forth, is shared with Google Analytics. So what Google Tag Manager does is it actually uses the same sort of method to add Google tags and some other service tags to your site. So where previously, if you weren't using Tag Manager, you may have Google Analytics and some other third-party softwares on your site. Some of the other ones I think are AdRoll. AdRoll is one of them, and Optimizely is another one. So if you had those two services running on your site, you would actually have to load each of their JavaScripts to your site yourself. What Google Tag Manager actually allows you to do is manage those third-party JavaScripts through Google Tag Manager. So now what you're doing is you're actually asynchronously going out to Google Tag Manager and getting those JavaScripts and making those connections with one set of JavaScript on your site. So you're basically allowing Google Tag Manager to inject these items into your site pages on a as-needed basis. Where this is really helpful is even if you were just using Google services, if you were using Google Analytics and Google AdWords and maybe Webmaster Tools for Google, which now is not called Webmaster Tools anymore. But anyway, those three things could all be managed in one place with Google Tag Manager. So some of the benefits of using Tag Manager are loads all of your JavaScript asynchronously, so you get a performance improvement there, and it's one place that you can manage all of these kind of third-party dependencies, and Google will worry about injecting them into the site for you. You can also write rules to have certain pages tracked and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit more configurable than just kind of dropping them in and having to code up the different page templates that they may appear on. So
the point of this is if you're using multiple third-party analytics tools, Tag Manager can be the managing place to manage all of those.
Right.
In one place, okay.
And it's actually makes it a lot easier, too, because you can set up, I know for one of the commerce sites that we're working on, you can actually set up goals, and you through commerce, I think it's Google Analytics Commerce, you can actually fire back analytical data for commerce to Google Tag Manager, and Google Tag Manager will fulfill those goals if they're met and record those sorts of conversions for you. So you get a lot of benefit out of it. One of the biggest ones I see is, again, that ability to load all of your JavaScripts asynchronously and not have to worry about the performance impact of using a bunch of different JavaScript dependencies. But it's also a lot cleaner to manage some of these goals and analytical conversions that you may want to track.
So a key with Google Analytics is that it's JavaScript based. There is an option for Drupalers to Pwick. I'm heading towards Pwick, but now I'm trying to decide if it's actually JavaScript based as well. I can't remember.
I think it is.
It is, right? Okay.
I've never used Pwick, but I would imagine that it would be.
So Pwick, is that how you say it? P-I-W-I-K. I guess it's Pwick. is another analytics capturing tool similar to Google Analytics. It works very much like it, except that it's not Google. It's a tool that you download and install yourself on your own server. Could be on the server the website's on, could be on a different server, but you're now not sharing your analytics with Google. So if it's a private network, or if someone's sensitive about, Google getting their information, Piwik is a pretty good option, and it really integrates nicely with Drupal. So the Piwik module allows you to see analytics from Piwik directly in your Drupal admin interface.
Yep. And I believe it's also, well, not believe, it's also open source.
Right, it is.
So you kind of can audit the code yourself a lot easier than analytics. So yeah, as you said, it's a really good option. It's most primarily used when people have their stuff behind a firewall and don't want to open up a port for analytics.
Yeah, I had a customer. The first customer I used it on, it was years ago. Was anti-Google. Didn't want to share any of their data with them, and Piwik worked perfectly for them for years and years. And then they were working with a marketing company to improve website traffic and stuff. And that company, like, one of their requirements was that Google Analytics was used on the website. So for probably about a year, they used both for whatever reason, and then decided at some point, I said, you know what, you're kind of doing the same thing twice, and so they ended up turning Piwik off. But it worked great for a number of years.
So there's another way to gather some analytics that's a little bit different that we haven't talked about, and they're similar analytics. So both Piwik and Google Analytics are typically tracking the number of users on a site, how often they visit the site, how long they spend on the site, that kind of information. If you're using a reverse proxies like Cloudflare, you can also get DNS Analytics, and DNS Analytics can give you some similar results. They tend to be a little bit more accurate with the number of calls and the number of users that hit the site, just because everything has to pass through them. You don't have to worry about JavaScript being called, but they tend to be a little bit less accurate when it comes to like the number of users. So or like the number of times a visitor came back. They tend not to be particularly accurate, but you can get a pretty good sense at the amount of traffic. I mean, DNS Analytics will typically be a lot higher than Google Analytics because you're not relying on JavaScript. But as I said, you're having a bit more trouble determining if it's a returning user versus a new user with those kind of analytics. But it's a good way to see the amount of requests that your server is getting if you don't have access to your server directly.
Right. The Cloudflare numbers tend to be significantly higher, right, than the Google Analytics numbers?
Yeah, and it's important that you're looking at the users, not the requests, because a request is like each time, each resource on your server ends up being a request. So if you have like 20 images on a page, it's 20 requests right there. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the users, but they'll always be higher.
Right.
Definitely.
Okay. Anything else that we want to bring up regarding analytics that we've missed and wanted to say?
I think that covered.
John, you good?
Yeah, I think so. Analytics is one of those topics you could really talk about, it seems, forever. And some people really jump into it and love talking about it forever. But I think I'm good.
So if you have any comments about this show or recommendations for future shows, always you could reach out to us at talkingdrupal@gmail.com. We do get a bit of activity on the comments on our website as well. So any of the episodes that you've listened to, you can go right there and send some comments in. We also have a listener line at 401-400-2004. That's 401-400-2004 if you want to give us some voice feedback. as well. Let's talk about our module of the week, which we have as simple ads, which you've already mentioned that earlier today, Nick.
Yep. So the module of the week, as you said, is simple ads. So simple ads is a simple little module. I don't think that it gives you the most accurate statistics, to be honest, and there's a couple of odd edge cases. But what I use it for primarily is it gives you the ability to add ad blocks. By default, it gives you two different ones. One is a content ad, and one is a sidebar ad. So I typically have, exactly that. One that goes in the header or the content, and one that is a bit narrower and more square that goes in the sidebar. And it gives you a couple of different options. You can set it up so that, for example, on each page load, it chooses a new ad that's active and displays it. You can also set it up to kind of rotate between the ads automatically. And it does a fairly good job at randomizing that. You have a couple of options on the node page, so when you're creating it, you can create different kinds of ads. Like you can have text ads or image ads or flash ads. My clients only ever use the image ads, so I can really only speak about that. But for example, you can say this ad is active and it starts being active today and ends 3 weeks from now. Or I want to make it active at the beginning of September and deactivate at the end of September. So you can kind of schedule how the ads are going to go. You can create campaigns, and it's a handy little module. It's pretty useful. I think the primary reason it gets used is that you can then click on the ad as an admin and see on the back end how many times people have seen it and clicked on it. If your client doesn't need those analytics for it, then I would probably just build a custom content type and use Flex Ladder or something, because it tends to be a little bit faster and more reliable. But if you need those analytics, then use simple ads.
Okay. So I think this episode, I'll actually give a chance for everyone to say goodbye, like I didn't do in the last episode. So John, where can people contact you if they'd like to learn more about John Picozzi?
Oh man, how much more could they learn? If you would like to contact me, you can reach out to me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi. If you'd like to work with me, Oomph is hiring. So if you go to oomphinc.com, check out our jobs page. You can find out what positions we're hiring for, and that's pretty much it. That's where I'm at.
Great. How about you, Nick?
You can find me online pretty much everywhere at Nixman, Nicxvan. Feel free to reach out on Twitter or on the Talking Drupal website.
Excellent. And I'm Stephen Cross. You can find me on Twitter at Stephen Cross with a PH, or at parallaxinfotech.com. And that's a show wrap, guys. Talk to you in a few weeks.
See you in a few weeks.
Take care.